Chinese President Xi Jinping is now wrapped up his three-day meeting with Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin by pledging to shape a new world order.
Yeah, and listen to this language. Xi told Putin that they are driving changes not seen in a century and will provide an alternative to Western influence. As for the war in Ukraine, Xi said China remains impartial. For more on this, let's bring in former U.S. Ambassador to China, Max Baucus. He's also a former U.S. Senator from Montana. Thank you for being with us today. I want to get your view on why you see Xi visiting Putin as beneficial for China and vice versa, considering that the war in Ukraine is a complicating factor and a unifier for Western forces in many ways.
Well, frankly, I think it's pretty straightforward. In your opening, you mentioned that China does see itself as a rising power to be in a position to virtually show to the world, especially southern countries, that it is a co-equal power, co-equal to the United States. And part of that is its alignment with Russia. China very much needs Russia as a flank on in Europe, causing some problems for the U.S. It does not want to see Ukraine fall because that would be very embarrassing to Russia and also to China. So it will help Russia. So Russia needs China, and Russia needs China for oil, for crude oil, for natural gas, for coal, and so forth. So, by the way, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. Russia is selling those products to China,
right,
and China's buying. China needs them.
Yeah. Ambassador Baucus, it's obvious with Xi's photo op with President Putin that they are talking about their alignment, but there still was no movement in Ukraine in terms of peace. And China has proffered itself as a peace broker in that war. Obviously, that's something that has been rejected by the West and by Ukraine. But we didn't also hear President Xi go a step further in his support for Putin and Russia's aggression there. What does that tell you about how President Xi is still trying to thread that needle?
Well, President Xi sees himself ultimately and China as a challenge to the United States. The United States leading the Western world. So Xi is using Russia the best way he can, and also showing to the world that it's potentially a broker. Now, nobody believes it because the war in Ukraine is so much supported by Russia, although the U.S. is supplying immense arms to Ukraine. But on the other hand, people do believe a little bit of Xi's brokering of the Iran-Saudi Arabia deal not too long ago. He is trying to portray himself as being a world leader.
Right.
Now, it's not that credible in the Western world, but it is becoming more credible in developing countries, and that's really the audience he's aiming at.
And Ambassador, what do you make of the release, the joint statement Putin and Xi released after their meeting, effectively calling the U.S. and its allies a major security threat in Asia? We know that there's a debate over the South China Sea, that there's this kind of potential war with Taiwan hanging in the balance between China and that nation. How do you see that characterization?
Well, it's regrettable. The relationship between the U.S. and China is falling precipitously. It's going to continue to fall, frankly, until a couple of things happen. One, there's either some extraordinary leadership in China and or in the U.S., and frankly, I don't see that happening. Both countries are kind of let their relationship fall into a bad spot. And it's because of domestic politics of both countries. Certainly the U.S., most everybody in the U.S. is strongly anti-China. I must say the same is true in China. They're anti-U.S. And so it's just we're not talking to each other. And I think as a consequence, China feels that the United States is trying to contain it. It's trying to stop China's rise. It's trying to stop China from being a player. And of course, that doesn't go over very well in China. On the other hand, we in the United States were concerned about China's growth. And so we have aligned ourselves with Pacific countries, Australia, Japan, et cetera. And we are trying to figure out ways to stop China's rise, to be honest, with export controls which prevent U.S. technology from going to China. So we're in a bad spot. Now, frankly, when asked to ask, well, what's the answer here? What's the solution? I think that we're coming to a point where with China's rise, and China in many ways somewhat co-equal to the United States, that we have to rethink our policy toward China. It cannot be just stop China. China's always going to be there. China's not going to go away. You know, it's like a marriage of convenience. We don't love each other, but we have to live with each other and find some way to accommodate ourselves. Otherwise, it's going to get worse, and that's going to threaten the livelihood of our kids and our grandkids.
Yeah, and certainly China is known for playing a long game and thinking in terms of multi-generations as opposed to one election cycle, which we can be guilty of here in the United States. All right, Ambassador Max Baucus, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador.